Hey everyone, it is your boy Jack here, and in today's video, I'm going to try not to freeze to death while talking about the top 10 comics of 2019. So yeah, that's basically the premise for the video. Besides that, before we start and dive into the top 10 comics of 2019, I firstly just want to say thank you to everyone who has subscribed to this channel and everything, and people who've left comments, who have left likes or even dislikes, because like it's helped me sort of realize and see what kind of content I want to put out there and everything. And I just want to say thank you for all the continued support and everything, because it really does mean a lot to me. So yeah, besides that, and before, like, one last thing before we dive into the top 10 comics of 2019, I want to shout out one of the comics from this past decade as the comic of the week. And that comic is Nightcrawler from 2014. That comic is done by Chris Clairemont and everything, and I forget the artists and stuff, unfortunately, but it is a really, really good comic. I really like it. It sort of made me understand and love the sort of the blue elf on the shelf behind me. And yeah, like, I just wanted to sort of shout that comic out. Feel free to check the description why I wanted to shout it out. But yeah, besides that, let's dive into the top 10 comics of 2019. So coming in at number 10, it is a comic book character who's probably had one of the biggest evolutions throughout her comic book career. This includes her going from a side character to a main character to headlining on her own series, as well as being having her own comic book movie that was really mediocre this year, but having a really better written cameo in Avengers Endgame. Coming in at comic number 10, we got Captain Marvel. Now, I know I initially gave this comic book a bad rap since getting the comic in the comic box or subscription box, since I felt that this comic was a bit more of a marketing ploy for Captain Marvel. But the first issue impressed me with the action-packed adventure leading into a storyline that leads the first 5 issues, when Captain Marvel is trapped in a dimension with other women having to fight their way out, leading to a War of the Realms tie-in. I find that what I like about this story is it puts Captain Marvel in a position that she has to swap bodies with Rogue and Doctor Strange, which becomes an interesting character study on her relationship with both characters, but also sort of each character individually. I'm putting this comic at number 10 for the reason that I've only come to the 8th issue of the comic, and after the first 5 issues and the War of the Realms tie-ins, I really want to see what this comic has in store for the future of the series and how dark Captain Marvel ties into it. Now, with all that being said, let's dive into comic number 9. So coming in at number 9, we got Web of Venom, Cult of Carnage, and Carnage Born. Now, I decided to put 2 comics in this top 10 list together on one spot because I felt like these 2 comics are sort of the same in a way. They're both really good one-shots written by some really great comic book writers, really great art attached to the comic as well. And I felt that if I was going to separate these comics into 2 separate spots, it would have taken away a spot for another really great comic. So I put them together on one spot because I felt that, you know what, they would have been better comics together rather than separate. And with that being said, this is what I like about these 2 comics. Now, these 2 comics are an example of a one-shot being done right, since the story is encased in the comic. It has great pacing and world building, allowing the reader to understand the stakes. I love how both comics are different from each other, with Carnage Born being a dark origin story of the symbiote Carnage that keeps your spine tingling to the last page, whereas Cult of Carnage is about an investigation where the attack from the Cult of Carnage on a town is investigated on why it happened. Both comics are a great tease of the biggest comic event of the year, Absolute Carnage. Now, that's the main reason why I put these comics at number 9, because I felt that these comics, if they were just regular one-shots, then I probably would have put them higher on the list, but because they are tied to a bigger event, I felt that, you know, I'll keep them a bit lower on the list, giving it a bit more opportunity for some other comics. So yeah, that's comic number 9. Coming in at number 8, it's the only indie comic on this list. It is Go-Gore. Now, the best way to describe Gogor is, imagine if Lord of the Rings and the Dark Crystal had a child. It'd be this comic behind me, Gogor. Since it puts the F in fantasy. Now, this comic is great since it's a light-hearted adventure for readers who want to escape the superhero world or dark tales from indie comics. The comic centers around Armano, a student who flees from one of his world's floating islands after a conflict broke out, forcing him to summon a beast called Gogor to defeat the Domus, who has invaded his lands. What I like about this comic is that it is in no way wants to be what other comics are, which are intense character studies on certain characters to build up big events that you need background on. This story, you need the opposite of that story. It's a very simple premise, and you need to focus on the world building and how the world is affected by the events of the first issue and the other issues moving forward. That's why this comic's at number 8, for its simple storytelling, and it's a good comic to let your mind wander. So coming in at number 7, we got Cosmic Ghost Rider Destroying Marvel History. So what I like about this comic is that the character has really great dark humor, which is something I look for when choosing comics. Since there's so many dark comics, you gotta find one that makes you smile. This comic is great since it goes through some of the main moments of the Marvel history. For example, it goes through the Days of Future Past and the Phoenix Force storylines, which were just hilarious because Cosmic Ghost Rider is just such a narcissist that it makes him stand out in the best way. I also had to include this comic because it has Canadian Spider-Man in it, and I'm sort of hoping that they make an amazing Canadian Spider-Man and they have Jamal Campbell and Chip Zdarsky writing, because you've got to have the two Canadians write and draw for the Canadian web slinger. Now, back to the space guy with the flaming skull. I really love this series since it's hilarious and tragic, which helps create a well-balanced story. I initially put this comic at number 8, but after reflecting on the great moments of this character and the story, I felt that number 7 was a better spot. Lastly, I would also love to see a Deadpool Cosmic Ghost Riders comic series, because it'd be interesting yet challenging since both characters are so similar yet different at the same time. I would love to see how they would interact with each other throughout a whole series. With that being said, let's move forward to comic number 6. Coming in at number 6, it's a comic with a weird title. It is Batman Superman. What makes this comic great is that the comic itself follows Batman and Superman trying to capture the Batman who laughs before he infects the whole Justice League. With the comic centering itself around the city of Gotham following the events of the Batman Who Laughs series. Now, the comic is great since it opens up the relationship between Batman and Superman. And this is interesting since they have different viewpoints on how to face this villain. The art is amazing, it's dark, and it has a lot of depth, with Ed McGuinness showing a lot of variety in his art style to help describe this crazy story. The Batman Who Laughs is what makes this comic book series great though. Since the series continues and as the series continues, the other members of the Justice League are corrupted by the Batman Who Laughs. It becomes more and more interesting to see what these corrupted characters have in store. For example, in issue number 2, Shazam becomes the Shazam Who Laughs. And the writing is really great since it's a conflict with Shazam and Billy Batson on who has control. On top of all of this, the Batman Who Laughs infection becomes more and more of an interference to Shazam as the story progresses. This comic is great because it does what DC does right. Dark comics. Moving out of that to a bit more of a lighter comic, comic number 5 is going to make me look like a bit of a hypocrite. So let's just rip the band-aid off and jump into comic number 5. So comic number 5 is Black Hammer Justice League. And this is a hilariously fascinating comic. Now, the comic centers around Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Cyborg, and the characters from the Black Hammer universe getting trapped in each other's universes. This is what makes this comic great, since the DC characters are such polished, serious characters and are tossed into such an unpolished world. Whereas Black Hammer's characters are the opposite, since they're wacky, unfiltered characters in such a polished world. This is why this comic is at number 5, since like comic number 7, it uses the advantage of tragedy and humor to its advantage. But what sets it apart from Cosmic Ghost Rider is its story has to focus on characters from 2 different universes and develop them in the opposite universes. And develop a storyline around that. Whereas Cosmic Ghost Rider is something that I felt has been done before. And that's why this comic is at number 5. Coming in at number 4, it's the only sequel series on this list, and it continues the DC run also on this list. It is Batman, Curse of the White Knight. Now, you know I gotta put some Sean Murphy on this list, and I know I'm a bit biased here because I love the Batman Curse of the White Knight series, but I felt like I had to put this comic on this list because it's just awesome. It's just amazing, and let me tell you a bit on why. Now, the writing continues its descent into the dark world of Gotham and its origins. The story becomes more and more of a mystery box of what will happen as new characters emerge and others fade away. Going into the 5th issue into this sequel series, it continues to leave questions open, like what will happen to Batman? Where is the Joker? And will Harley Quinn, will she be playing as big of a role as she did in the first series? This is a great example on why this comic is at number 4. Each question leaves you on a cliffhanger wanting more. The art is amazing and it's what you can expect from Sean Murphy. Dark, gritty, and as many motorcycles as possible. That's why this comic's at number 4. Coming in at number 3, we got the event that has hyped the future of Venom. It is Absolute Carnage. Yes, I gotta put some Donny Cates on this list. Like, I have to. If I don't, I'm like dishonoring the comic book community, or at least I feel like I am. Now, I'm not reading Donny Cates' run on Venom, but after reading Absolute Carnage, your boy's honestly sort of considering catching up on it, just because of how amazing it is. Now, this comic is great since it's centered around Carnage wanting to become a god-level being to destroy Null, the symbiote god. With Spider-Man, Eddie Brock, and crew trying to stop this by gathering people who have previously worn symbiotes in order to weaken Carnage and his crew of mindless mercenaries. The first issue is amazing, and it starts off with a 62-page giant, leaving you gripped on to the edge of your seat. As the series continues, the comic feels cinematic, with each panel feeling like a scene pulled out of an animated movie. The art threw me off initially since Venom felt a bit cartoony, but it's something I came to like. The art is stunning and it has such a high level of detail in each panel. You can tell that the artist Ryan Stegman has a lot of passion for creating this story. The main reason I have this comic at number 3 is I felt that the comic ended too early, and that although this series ended when Carnage died, I would have wanted to see something done with the Null storyline, since I felt that the main Carnage storyline was becoming overtaken by the Null storyline. That's why this comic's at number 3, since it is amazing up until the end. Moving forward to the next comic here, comic number 2. Fun fact, it was originally put in the number 1 spot, but after some careful deliberation, catching up on the first issue, like the current issues and everything, I decided to put this comic at comic number 2, and I'll explain why in a minute. With that being said though, coming in at comic number 2, it is Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, the comic is great if you're a fan of sci-fi adventures with Marvel characters. And the story is split into 2 parts. The first issue, which is the first part, which is the first 6 issues, follows the events of Infinity Warps and Thanos' legacy. The Guardians of the Galaxy are facing off against the Black Order, trying to find the person who has who has Thanos' consciousness embedded in them. Now, I originally put this comic at number 1 just for this first act alone, since it was great, it was action-packed, and it had so many characters I haven't seen interact before, which brought me a lot of hilarity and intrigue. Probably one of my favorite scenes in the first act is when Cosmic Ghost Rider and Groot are fighting between each other, and Groot gets pissed off, so he makes a bunch of little mini Groots to attack Cosmic Ghost Rider, and it was just such a hilariously stupid scene, and I loved it. But with that being said, the first act builds very well and develops both sides, leading to a fight on whether or not to resurrect Thanos. And this first act left me in awe of what the future will hold and what will happen to the characters that this first act focused on. Now, the second act is split into two storylines. The first has had an amazing start with the reveal of the new enemy, the Universal Church of Truth, and the majority of the Guardians being trapped in the church after a fake rescue call was sent to the Guardian ship on behalf of Quill's dad. It's great since it dives into the world building immediately and shows the power that the Universal Church has and the threat it has on humanity. Now, the second storyline focuses on Rocket Raccoon, who is dying, and he, Groot, and Moondragon have to find an escape plan to rescue the Guardians. This second act is something that I've come to love since it builds differently compared to the previous half. It focuses more on Rocket Raccoon's storyline and what he stands for, which, with the rest of the comic revolving around a simple plot. This structure allows the reader to understand the gravity of the situation with Rocket Raccoon, but as well enjoying the simple subplot revolving around the rest of the crew trying to destroy the Universal Church of Truth. The main reason why I put this comic at number 2 is because I felt that this comic's second half is very intense, but unfortunately doesn't have any humor to balance out this intense comic, which made this comic scene a bit tonally inconsistent. Before we get to the number 1 spot on this list, I wanted to just do some honorable mentions to some comics I haven't read yet, but want to read, or some comics that I was thinking about putting on this list, but didn't really make the cut. So with that being said, let's dive into the honorable mentions here. So, firstly, I gotta shout out the comics that I have been reading, or the ones that I have been reading, but didn't really make the cut, and those two are really just The Amazing Spider-Man and Miles Morales Spider-Man. And I felt like I didn't want to put these two on the list just because I felt like The Amazing Spider-Man is a good story and everything, but I really felt that it didn't try to do or push to do anything unconventional, and it just got me frustrating. I'm like, okay, just a simple day-to-day stuff, like this is just, I wish we got to see a bit more with that. And then with Miles Morales Spider-Man, I sort of feel like it's the same. It's like, okay, you need to push yourself out of the way of being like, just being Spider-Man. Like, I want to see you do more here. And that's sort of why I didn't really consider these two on the list. But I wanted to sort of shout them out because they are good comics. I just sort of wish they were doing a bit more and a bit more unconventional and stuff. But that's just me. And then I want to shout out some of the comics that I haven't read yet this year, or haven't fully read, or whatever. And that's like Undiscovered Country. Haven't got that yet. I'm sort of hoping in the comic box or subscription box I get the Stadium exclusive, or just even one of the comics, like the Undiscovered Country in there. That Folklords, fingers crossed that that's in the comic box or two. Really want to read that. I've been wanting to read it ever since like October when it was announced it was going to come out. That's another one. House and Powers of X. For a long time debated whether or not to get that in trade or get that just in single issues, but I've sort of settled on single issues. Just haven't ordered it yet. I'm just sort of waiting on a couple comics to see whether or not I should order those. And then what else? Basically, then just a Doomsday Clock. I want to order issue number 12, just so I can read them all in trade, do a review and everything for it in the new year when I get a minute. So yeah, the Doomsday Clock, I think I just sort of fell out of that comic because it just kept on getting freaking delayed, and it's like, it's a good comic. The first like 4 or 5 issues, I'm like, oh damn, like these are not bad comics. This isn't a bad comic, great issues, all that stuff. But it's just like, if it didn't get delayed as much, I think I would have enjoyed it a bit more, because by the time I ordered like up to comic 7, I'm like, I started reading it and I'm like, I don't know, I can't read this because like it's been delayed so much. I forget what happened in this previous issue. Now with that being said, the comic coming in at number 1 is a comic that ran out of fear. It is Daredevil. Now this comic is amazingly intense and thought-provoking, with the first 5 issues putting the man without fear in a position of fear, as he has to escape the law and the corrupt police force controlled by Mayor Kingpin, who are in charge of hunting down Daredevil, who is falsely accused of murder, leaving the man without fear to run from the law he has previously defended. The comic leads to confrontations with the Defenders of New York, the Punisher, and Spider-Man, who attempt to stop Matt Murdock from continuing his escape from the law. Now what's great about these first 5 issues of the comic is that the fact that the lawyer becomes the criminal, and Murdock is put in a situation where, like some of his former clients, he's put on trial for a crime he didn't commit by the city he swore to protect. But it isn't just Daredevil that makes this comic great, it's how Chip Zdarsky handles Kingpin and his relationship with the police force. Since Kingpin is looked at as a puppet master who's been in control of revealing who the Devil of Hell's Kitchen is, the comic focuses on lead investigator Cole North, who is on the hunt for Daredevil, and his perspective becomes more interesting and more villainous as his obsession with Daredevil comes to a conclusion. Now, my biggest fear about this comic was how it was going to continue past these first 5 issues, but it bounced back, and in a pretty great way, with the next 5 issues focusing on Matt Murdock rather than Daredevil. And at first it feels weird since the story is completely different than the first 5 issues, but I think that's just partially because Marco Cicchetto, the series artist for the first 5 issues, left. But besides that, the comic really does build slowly, focusing on Matt's life as he becomes a parole officer. And I like this, since compared to the Amazing Spider-Man series, which focuses on a similar style of storytelling, showing the normal life of a person, what sets Daredevil apart from the Amazing Spider-Man series is the fact that it's drawn and feels like a normal day-to-day of a person. Whereas I feel like the Amazing Spider-Man doesn't really feel natural in its approach and fails to find anything to try to ground Peter. Now, by providing this moment of normalcy, it allows the character to reflect on his past. And this is why this second half convinced me on why this is a comic of the year. Since you get such a great level of depth showing the impact that being a superhero has on a person. And the best example of this is in issue number 7, where Matt is confronting a man who he is a parole officer for, and it's revealed that Daredevil killed a younger man's brother who was the provider for the family. And this is why the second half pays off, since it makes Murdock confront his past as a masked vigilante. Lastly, the story includes lead investigator Cole North after his transfer to another station. And this is where it gets interesting, since his obsession with Daredevil and vigilantes comes to a quick end. Then after exposing his co-worker for being responsible for an assault against him, he is threatened by the Owls, which is a society of corrupt police members, leading to a confrontation at the police headquarters, and that's when Daredevil springs into action, revealing himself to Detective Cole North. And what I particularly like about this is the fact that Zdarsky uses storytelling techniques used in comics like Watchmen to really help foreshadow this confrontation. The best example I have here is in issue number 9 of and page 12 of that issue. Zdarsky puts another character's dialogue, Daredevil, into Cole North's scene. And he does this to mirror these two characters' arcs as similar moments. And overall, that's the reasons why this comic is the comic of the year, since it's able to have an action-packed crime adventure, but still allow for some great storytelling moments and great character development. Now to conclude, these are my top 10 comics of 2019, adding on the honorable mentions as well. And I have to admit, I love that I was writing, like, how this turned out and everything. I love, like, sort of going back and looking at some of these really great comics and understanding why they're so great and everything. But with that being said, those are all my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Do you think I missed some comics? Do you think I should have added some comics onto the list? Do you think some should have gone up, some should have gone down? Let me know down below, because I would love to hear it. Besides that though, thank you so much for the support over this past year and over the past 2 years I've been doing YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Or past 2 or 3 years or whatever. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Jack. Feel free to check out the comic of the week down below, Nightcrawler, and see why I think it's the comic of the week. But besides that, I hope to see you in the new year. Thanks so much for watching, and bye.